Have you ever been made to feel completely worthless by someone you once loved? What happens when the person who called you a nobody is forced to watch as you're treated like royalty by the one man he idolizes? This is the story of Amelia, a woman whose world was shattered by a cruel public insult from her ex-husband. She was ready to disappear to accept the lie that she was insignificant. But in a single, breathtaking moment, a reclusive billionaire turned the tables in the most spectacular way, not just changing her life, but destroying the man who broke her. Get ready for a story of karma, revenge, and the incredible power of a woman finally realizing her own worth. The cream-colored envelope felt heavier than its weight in paper. It sat on Amelia Hayes's small second-hand kitchen table, an alien artifact in her world of chipped mugs and sensible grocery lists. Her name was written across the front in an elegant, looping calligraphy that seemed to mock her own plain block-letter existence. Ms. Amelia Hayes, not Mrs. Thompson. She hadn't been Mrs. Thompson for 2 years, but the ghost of that name still haunted the quiet corners of her one-bedroom apartment. Inside the invitation was an embossed masterpiece of cardstock and gold foil. The Board of Trustees and Gala Chair. Mr. Alistair Sterling requests the pleasure of your company at the Metropolitan Grand Charity Ball. Below the details swam in a sea of formal script, a date, a time, a place so far removed from her reality it might as well have been on another planet. The Metropolitan Museum of Art. A black tie affair. Amelia traced the raised lettering of Alistair Sterling's name. Even she knew who he was. A titan of industry, a specter in the world of finance and technology, Sterling was a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. He was notoriously private, a modern-day Howard Hughes who rarely made public appearances. To be hosting this year's most exclusive charity event was major news. To have invited her was a mistake. It had to be a clerical error, a mailing list mix-up. Her ex-husband Mark Thompson was the one who belonged in these circles. During their 12-year marriage, she had been his plus one, a silent accessory, polished and positioned to reflect his own growing ambition. She wore the right dresses, smiled at the right people, and kept her own thoughts, her own dreams tucked away like old photographs in a dusty album. Her dream had been art, specifically the intricate, delicate art of jewelry design. In the small workshop she'd set up in a spare room of their sprawling suburban home, she would lose herself for hours coaxing silver and semi-precious stones into miniature sculptures. They were pieces that told stories, a nebula captured in a cluster of sapphires, a forest floor in the filigree of a silver leaf. Mark had called it her little hobby. "It's cute, honey," he'd say, glancing in for a moment before heading off to a late-night meeting. "But you're not going to make a living selling trinkets at a craft fair." He wasn't cruel about it, not at first. It was a gentle, patronizing dismissal that was somehow worse. It was the casual wave of a hand that designated her life's passion as insignificant, a childish pastime to keep her busy, while he did the important work of building his empire in corporate real estate. The memory sent a familiar ache through her chest. She pushed the invitation away, the smooth cardstock suddenly feeling cold and sharp. Why would she even consider going to walk into a room filled with people like Mark? People who measured a person's worth by the name on their suit label or the size of their stock portfolio. She would be a ghost at the feast, a walking reminder of a failed marriage and a life she had been unceremoniously ejected from. Her phone buzzed, dragging her back to the present. It was Chloe, her best friend, and the one person who had seen her through the wreckage of her divorce. "Did you get it?" Chloe's voice was electric. "Get what?" "The weekly reminder that I'm broke and single." Amelia tried for a light tone, but it came out brittle. "No, silly." "The golden ticket. The invitation to the ball." Amelia's heart sank. "You got one too?" "Of course not. My invitation came in the form of you, my darling friend, telling me all about it. I saw your name on the preliminary guest list. My cousin works for the event planner." I almost screamed. "Amelia, you have to go." The guest list. The words hung in the air. This wasn't a mistake. She was intentionally invited. But why? She hadn't done anything of note. Since the divorce, her life had been a quiet tapestry of rebuilding. She worked a stable but unexciting job as an administrative assistant at a small architectural firm. Her nights and weekends were spent in her tiny new workshop, a converted walk-in closet where she poured all her pain, her hope, her resilience into her craft. She had started a small, anonymous online shop selling a few pieces here and there under the simple moniker AH Designs. It paid for her materials and the occasional nice bottle of wine, but it was hardly the stuff of high society. "I can't, Chloe." Amelia said the words tasting like defeat. "I have nothing to wear. I don't belong there. Mark will be there." The name landed with a thud. Mark and his new fiancée, Isabella Vance, a woman whose pedigree was as flawless as her bone structure, would undoubtedly be the center of attention. The thought of seeing them, of enduring their pitying smiles, or worse, their complete indifference, was suffocating. "All the more reason to go," Chloe insisted, her voice fierce. "You can't let him keep you small, Ames. You've spent 2 years building yourself back up. Don't hide. Walk in there with your head held high and remind him of what he lost. Remind yourself what he lost." Mark hadn't seen it as a loss. He'd seen it as an upgrade. He had shed his starter wife for the newer, shinier model who could better navigate the social stratosphere he was so desperate to conquer. "And as for what to wear," Chloe continued, her voice softening, "I think you know the answer to that. You've got a closet full of masterpieces, not dresses, jewelry. Wear that simple black dress we bought last year. And Amelia, wear the nightingale." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The nightingale. It was her magnum opus, a piece she had finished just last month. A brooch crafted from hammered sterling silver shaped into a bird. In mid-song, its throat a single perfectly cut sapphire that seemed to hold the very color of twilight. Its wings were an impossible lattice of silver filigree, and its eye was a tiny winking diamond. It was the most beautiful, most personal thing she had ever made. She'd poured a year of lonely nights and silent tears into it. It was her soul rendered in metal and stone. To wear it in a place like that, it felt like walking into a lion's den, wearing her own heart on her lapel. "I don't know, Chloe." "Trust me," her friend urged. "It's time for the world to see you. Not Mrs. Thompson, the quiet wife, but Amelia Hayes, the artist." Later that night, long after the call had ended, Amelia stood before her mirror. The invitation lay on her dresser. In a velvet-lined box, the nightingale brooch rested, its sapphire eye catching the dim lamplight. Chloe's words echoed in her mind. "Remind yourself." Maybe this wasn't about Mark at all. Maybe it wasn't about impressing anyone. Maybe it was about proving to the woman in the mirror that she was no longer just a +1, that she was worthy of her own invitation. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she made a decision. She would go. The week leading up to the gala was a blur of anxiety and meticulous preparation. Amelia couldn't afford a designer gown, so she followed Chloe's advice, retrieving the simple, elegant black sheath dress they had found on a clearance rack months ago. It was unassuming, a canvas. Its purpose was not to draw attention to itself, but to the art it would carry. She spent hours polishing the nightingale brooch until the silver gleamed like moonlight, and the sapphire pulsed with an inner fire. It was her armor. The night of the ball, as the taxi pulled up to the grand floodlit entrance of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Amelia felt a wave of nausea. A river of black cars flowed towards the entrance, depositing men in sharp tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered like constellations. This was a world of effortless wealth and inherited confidence, two things Amelia had never possessed. "You belong here," she whispered to her reflection in the taxi window, the words a fragile prayer. She paid the driver, clutching her small handbag, and stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The flash of cameras was blinding. She instinctively flinched, but the photographers weren't looking at her. Their lenses were aimed at the stream of socialites, celebrities, and power brokers gliding up the iconic steps. She was invisible, a tiny gray moth fluttering at the edge of a bonfire. The thought brought a strange sense of relief. She could slip in, observe from the shadows, and slip out again. Inside, the great hall had been transformed into an enchanted forest. Towering floral arrangements reached towards the vaulted ceiling, and the air hummed with the sound of a string quartet and the murmur of 100 conversations. Amelia accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, the cool crystal a welcome anchor in the overwhelming sensory tide. For the first hour her plan worked. She found a quiet alcove behind a marble statue and simply watched. It was like observing a fascinating alien ecosystem. Women with impossibly smooth faces laughed without creasing their makeup. Men with booming voices clapped each other on the back, their talk a mix of stock prices and sailing trips. It was Mark's world in all its glittering hollow splendor. And then she saw him. He was holding court near the grand staircase, looking every bit the master of the universe in a custom-tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. On his arm was Isabella Vance. She was breathtaking, draped in a crimson gown that clung to her like a second skin, a cascade of diamonds around her throat. They were a power couple, a portrait of success, and the sight of them together sent a sharp, familiar pang through Amelia's heart. It wasn't jealousy, not anymore. It was the sting of a memory of a life that had once been hers, however ill-fitting it had been. She tried to turn to melt back into the shadows, but it was too late. Isabella's sharp eyes, constantly scanning the room for rivals and admirers, landed on her. A flicker of confusion crossed her perfect face, followed by a slow, condescending smile. She leaned in and whispered something in Mark's ear. Mark turned. His confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second as he registered her presence. He recovered quickly, his expression settling into a mask of polite indifference, but Amelia knew him. She saw the flash of annoyance in his eyes. Her being here was an inconvenience, a wrinkle in his perfectly curated evening. They began to walk towards her. Amelia's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at her to flee, but her feet were rooted to the floor. This was the moment she had been dreading. Amelia, Mark said, his voice smooth and devoid of any real warmth. "What a surprise to see you here." The implication was clear. "What is someone like you doing in a place like this, Mark?" "Isabella." Amelia replied, her own voice miraculously steady. She met Isabella's gaze. The other woman was appraising her from head to toe, her eyes lingering on the simple black dress with a barely concealed sneer. "I must say I'm shocked," Isabella purred, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "I didn't realize they were letting just anyone in this year. Did you cater the event?" The insult was so direct, so needlessly cruel, it took Amelia's breath away. Before she could formulate a response, Mark chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. He was playing to Isabella and to a portly man in a nearby circle who had turned to watch the exchange. "Be nice, darling," Mark said, though his eyes were twinkling with amusement. He gestured vaguely towards Amelia. She used to be a part of this world in a way. Amelia stood frozen, the champagne glass trembling in her hand. She felt the eyes of strangers on her, their faces a blur of curiosity and pity. She had been a fool to come here. She had armed herself with the nightingale, but she had forgotten that her own skin was not nearly thick enough. She looked at Mark, the man she had shared a bed with for over a decade, the man she had supported and sacrificed for, and saw a complete stranger. A cruel, smug stranger who was enjoying her discomfort. She had to leave. She had to get out before she completely fell apart. "It was nice seeing you both," she managed to choke out, turning to make her escape. But Isabella wasn't finished with her. "Wait," she said, her voice loud enough to draw more attention. She stepped forward and pointed a perfectly manicured finger at Amelia's chest. "What is that little thing you're wearing? Is that a craft project?" Her finger was aimed directly at the nightingale. The world seemed to slow down. The murmur of the crowd, the lilt of the string quartet, the clinking of glasses. It all faded into a dull, distant hum. The only thing Amelia could feel was the burning weight of Isabella's stare, and the collective gaze of the onlookers they had attracted. Isabella's question hung in the air, dripping with venom. A craft project. Amelia looked down at the nightingale brooch. Against the black fabric of her dress, the silver bird seemed to glow its sapphire throat, a tiny defiant heart. It was a piece of her soul, the culmination of countless hours of love and labor, and this woman had just dismissed it as a trinket, a piece of amateur craft. A cold rage, unfamiliar and sharp, began to cut through Amelia's panic. She lifted her chin, her eyes meeting Isabella's. "It's something I made," she said, her voice low but clear. Isabella let out a tinkle of laughter that was anything but merry. "Oh, that's precious. Mark, did you know your ex-wife was a little artist?" How quaint. Mark, seeing that he had an audience, decided to play his part. He was trying to secure a major real estate development deal with a group of investors, one of whom, a stern-faced man named Mr. Harrington, was standing just a few feet away, watching with an impassive expression. Mark needed to project an aura of power and success. An ex-wife in a simple dress with a homemade pin was a blemish on that image. He took a step forward, placing a proprietary hand on Isabella's arm as if to shield her from Amelia's contaminating presence. He looked at Mr. Harrington, then at the small circle of spectators, and finally his eyes landed on Amelia. There was no pity in them, no lingering affection, only cold, calculated dismissal. "Don't mind her," Mark said, his voice carrying with practiced ease across the immediate area. He gestured towards Amelia with a flick of his wrist, a gesture one might use to shoo away a fly. "She's a nobody. A nobody." The word struck Amelia with the force of a physical blow. It was one thing to be called that in the privacy of a bitter argument. It was another to have it declared as a simple, inarguable fact in a room full of the city's elite. The word was designed to erase her, to strip her of her history, her identity, her very presence. It was the ultimate expression of his contempt. She was not a person with feelings or a past they had shared. She was a non-entity, a ghost. The faces around her swam. Some looked away in second-hand embarrassment. Others wore faint, cruel smiles, enjoying the drama. Mr. Harrington's expression remained unreadable, but a slight frown touched his lips. Mark, however, seemed pleased with himself. He had drawn a line in the sand, firmly placing Amelia on the outside of it all, solidifying his own position within the glittering fortress of high society. Amelia felt a hot prickle of tears behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She stood there mute and shaking as the silence stretched into an eternity. She was a statue of humiliation, her hand clutching her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She had to go, now. She didn't care about making a scene. She just needed to escape the crushing weight of their judgment. She took a half step back, preparing to turn and flee, to run out of the grand hall and never look back. But then something changed. A subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the room. A hush began to spread from the grand entrance, a wave of silence that rolled through the crowd, extinguishing conversations as it went. The string quartet faltered, then stopped altogether. People turned their expressions curious, then awestruck. The collective gaze of the entire gala shifted from the small, pathetic drama near the staircase to a single point at the top of it. Standing there, flanked by 2 security guards, was a man who commanded attention without demanding it. He was tall and lean, with silver-streaked dark hair and eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored black tuxedo, no frills, no flash. He didn't need it. His presence alone was an event. It was Alistair Sterling. He surveyed the silent room with a calm, discerning gaze. Mark's jaw went slightly slack. He straightened his tie, a look of naked ambition and reverence on his face. This was the man he had been trying to get a meeting with for over a year. The man whose partnership could elevate his company into the stratosphere. Alistair Sterling began to descend the staircase, his movements fluid and deliberate. The crowd parted for him as if by instinct. He seemed to be heading towards the center of the room, towards the mayor and the other dignitaries. Mark subtly repositioned himself, hoping to catch the billionaire's eye. But Sterling didn't stop in the center of the room. He continued walking his path, unwavering, his gaze fixed. A knot of confusion and anticipation tightened in the hall. He was walking past the mayor. He was walking past the senators. He was walking directly towards their small frozen tableau of cruelty. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. He was looking right at them. No, not at them. He was looking at her. Mark froze completely, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. Isabella's smug smile faltered. Mr. Harrington watched, his eyebrows raised in surprise. Alistair Sterling stopped directly in front of their group. He didn't acknowledge Mark. He didn't even glance at Isabella. His intense, intelligent eyes were locked on Amelia, and in them she saw not pity, but a shocking, unmistakable glimmer of recognition and respect. He moved with a grace that was mesmerizing. Before anyone could speak, before Amelia could even breathe, he took her free hand. His touch was warm and firm. He brought her trembling fingers to his lips, and bowing his head in a gesture of profound deference that belonged to another century, he kissed her hand. The entire room held its breath. Mark Thompson stood frozen, his face a perfect mask of disbelief and horror. The billionaire, the untouchable titan, the man he idolized, was kissing the hand of the woman he had just declared to be a nobody. Then Alistair Sterling spoke, his voice quiet, but carrying with absolute authority in the stunned silence. "I've been searching for you everywhere, Miss Hayes." The silence that followed Alistair Sterling's words was absolute. It was a dense, heavy silence filled with the unspoken shock of hundreds of people witnessing the impossible. The universe had just tilted on its axis. The social hierarchy of the entire room had been dismantled and reassembled in a single bewildering moment. Amelia stared speechless. Alistair Sterling was still holding her hand, his thumb gently brushing against her knuckles. His gaze was direct and sincere, holding none of the pity she had expected, but rather an intensity that felt like a lifeline. Ms. Hayes. He knew her name, her real name. Mark's face had gone from disbelief to a ghastly pale white. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. This was a nightmare, a public career-ending hallucination. The man he had spent a year trying to impress was honoring the woman he had just publicly eviscerated. Isabella, for her part, looked as if she'd been slapped. The color drained from her face, leaving her crimson dress looking garish against her suddenly ashen skin. Her eyes darted from Sterling to Amelia, and back again, her sharp mind unable to compute the scene unfolding before her. I don't understand," Amelia finally managed to whisper, her voice trembling. A small, genuine smile touched Sterling's lips. It transformed his severe face, making him look approachable, almost kind. "Of course you don't. Allow me to explain." He released her hand, but remained standing protectively in front of her, creating a subtle barrier between her and the stunned figures of Mark and Isabella. He turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping over the rapt audience before landing briefly and with icy coldness on Mark. For months, Sterling began, his voice resonating with a quiet power that commanded the attention of everyone in the hall. "My foundation has been working with the auction committee for tonight's charity benefit. We receive hundreds of donations, of course, art jewelry experiences, but one piece came in anonymously, a piece of such exquisite craftsmanship, such profound artistry, that it stopped me in my tracks." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. With a few taps, he brought up an image and turned the screen for the people nearby to see. It was a professional, high-resolution photograph of a piece of jewelry displayed on a velvet cushion. It was the Nightingale. A collective gasp went through the nearby crowd. Amelia's heart stopped. She hadn't donated it. She would never part with it. A wave of confusion washed over her. This brooch, Sterling continued, his eyes finding Amelia's again, which we have called the Nightingale's song, was donated by a local gallery owner who purchased it from an online artisan a few weeks ago. He wished to remain anonymous, but he knew the piece was special and would fetch a significant price for the charity. He was right. Before the gala even began, the silent auction bidding for this piece surpassed every other item. We had collectors calling in from London, Dubai, and Hong Kong. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He was not just complimenting her work. He was broadcasting its value to the very people who had just deemed her worthless. The only information the gallery owner had was the artisan's signature mark AH. For weeks, my team and I have been trying to identify this mysterious AH. I consider myself a connoisseur of fine jewelry, and I have never seen modern work with this much soul, this much poetry in its design. I had to meet the person responsible. He gestured towards Amelia's lapel, and then I walked in here tonight and saw it. The genuine article, worn by its creator. His gaze was one of pure, unadulterated admiration. He saw her. He saw the artist she had hidden away, the talent she had allowed one man's casual cruelty to diminish. Amelia Hayes. He said the name a proclamation. You are A.H. The revelation rippled through the hall. Whispers erupted. People were craning their necks, looking at Amelia with new eyes. She was no longer the pathetic ex-wife in a plain dress. She was a mysterious, brilliant artist discovered and lauded by the most respected man in the city. Mark looked as if he was going to be physically sick. The craft project. The little trinket. He had mocked a piece that international collectors were fighting over. He had called its creator a nobody. Mr. Harrington, the investor. Mark was so desperate to impress, was now looking at Mark with an expression of undisguised contempt. The man was a fool. A man with such poor judgment and character could not be trusted with a 9-figure development deal. In that instant, Mark could feel his future crumbling to dust. Amelia's mind was racing. The online sale. It had been her biggest one yet to a private gallery in upstate New York. She had been so thrilled for the money she hadn't given the buyer a second thought. To think that it had led to this. I don't know what to say, she stammered, overwhelmed. You don't have to say anything, Sterling said softly. Your work speaks for itself. But I, for one, would be honored if you would allow me to escort you to my table. There are a number of people who are desperate to meet the artist of the hour. He offered her his arm. It was a gesture of rescue, of elevation. To take it would be to leave her old life and the man who defined it behind in the dust. To step into a new world that just moments ago she believed she could never belong to. She looked at Mark's horrified face one last time. She saw the desperation, the panic, the dawning realization of the colossal mistake he had made. And for the first time she felt nothing. No pain, no anger, not even pity. Just a profound and liberating indifference. He was a stranger, a footnote in a chapter of her life that had just slammed shut. With a newfound sense of grace she didn't know she possessed, Amelia placed her hand on Alistair Sterling's arm. I would be delighted, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice clear and strong. As Amelia took Alistair Sterling's arm, a path cleared before them as if by royal decree. The same people who had been looking at her with pity or disdain just moments before now smiled, their eyes filled with a new hungry curiosity. The power of Sterling's endorsement was absolute. He had not just validated her, he had anointed her. She spared one final glance over her shoulder. Mark was still frozen in place, a statue of ruin. Isabella was hissing something in his ear, her face contorted with fury. Their perfect power couple portrait had shattered. They were now the center of the wrong kind of attention, the focus of whispered gossip and scornful looks. The man who had judged Amelia so cruelly was now being judged by the entire room, and he was being found severely wanting. As Sterling led her through the grand hall, the buzz of conversation followed them. Amelia could hear snippets, A.H. Designs. I've heard of her. Can you believe he called her a nobody? That brooch is expected to break the auction record tonight. It was surreal. She felt as though she were floating, disconnected from the timid, insecure woman who had walked in here just a few hours ago. The hand on Sterling's arm was steady. Her back was straight. Sterling's table was in a prime location, a circular booth draped in velvet that offered a panoramic view of the gala. Seated there were a handful of the city's most influential figures, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, the formidable curator of the museum, and a sleek, silver-haired woman whom Amelia recognized as Jacqueline Vance, a legendary fashion editor. As they approached, all eyes turned to them. "Everyone," Alistair said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of excitement. "I would like you to meet the artist I was telling you about. This is Ms. Amelia Hayes, the creative genius behind The Nightingale's Song." The table rose in a collective gesture of respect. Jacqueline Vance's notoriously critical eyes scanned Amelia, but instead of the expected dismissal, they lit up with genuine interest. Ms. Hayes, the editor, said, her voice a low, gravelly purr. "Your work is sublime. The tension between the delicacy of the filigree and the strength of the form is simply masterful. It's a breath of fresh air." Amelia, who had read Jacqueline's magazine religiously for years, could only manage a starstruck "thank you." Sterling seated her in the place of honor next to him and signaled a waiter. "Ms. Hayes will have whatever she desires," he commanded before turning to her. "Now tell us everything. Where did you study? What inspires you?" For the next hour, Amelia found herself talking about her passion in a way she never had before. With Mark, she had always downplayed, it made it seem small to avoid his patronizing remarks. But here with these titans of culture, she spoke freely. She talked about her love for natural forms, her fascination with the way metal could be made to look as fragile as a spider's web, her belief that jewelry should be more than mere adornment, but a piece of wearable sculpture. They listened. They didn't just listen. They were captivated. They asked intelligent questions. They understood the language of her art. For the first time in her adult life, she felt truly, completely seen. Across the room, Mark's evening had devolved into a living hell. After Amelia had been swept away by Sterling, Mr. Harrington had approached him, his face a thundercloud. "Thompson," he'd said, his voice clipped and final. "My associates and I value judgment and character above all else. It's clear you possess neither. Consider our proposed partnership terminated. I suggest you don't contact my office again." He had turned and walked away without another word, leaving Mark reeling. That deal had been his masterpiece, the culmination of 2 years of work. It was gone. In the span of 10 minutes, he had lost everything he had been striving for. Isabella was ballistic. "How could you be so stupid?" she seethed, keeping her voice low to avoid further scenes, but her eyes were blazing. "You humiliated me. You made us look like fools. You called Alistair Sterling's prized artist a nobody. How was I supposed to know?" Mark shot back, his voice cracking with desperation. "She was my wife for 12 years. All she ever did was tinker in that stupid little room of hers. She was nothing." But even as he said the words, they tasted like ash in his mouth. He was the fool. He had lived with a treasure, and had been too blind and arrogant to see it. He had thrown away a diamond because he thought it was a common stone. The irony was so bitter it choked him. He frantically tried to salvage the evening, approaching old contacts, trying to laugh off the incident, but it was no use. The tide had turned against him. People who had been eager to speak with him earlier now offered curt nods and turned their backs. His social currency had plummeted to 0. He was toxic. Back at Sterling's table, the auctioneer took the stage to announce the final bids for the marquee items. When he got to The Nightingale's Song, a hush fell over the room. "The bidding for this anonymous, breathtaking piece has been fierce all evening," the auctioneer announced. "The current bid from a collector in Geneva stands at $250,000. Amelia almost choked on her champagne. $250,000. "For her brooch, do I have $275,000? The auctioneer called out. A paddle went up. $300,000. Another paddle. Alistair Sterling leaned over to Amelia, his eyes twinkling. "Watch this," he whispered. As the price climbed to a staggering $400,000, Sterling raised his own paddle for the first time. "I have a bid from our host," the auctioneer boomed, his voice filled with excitement. Mr. Alistair Sterling bids $1 million. The hall erupted in gasps and applause. It was an unheard-of sum for a piece by an unknown artist. It was a statement. Sterling wasn't just buying a brooch, he was investing in a legend. The gavel fell with a resounding crack. Sold to Mr. Alistair Sterling. Amelia stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Why would you do that?" she breathed. "Because he said his gay's serious and unwavering genius should be recognized, and because I want you to have the original back. Consider the money a grant and investment in AH Designs. I expect you'll be needing to scale up production very soon." The applause for the record-breaking bid eventually subsided, but the energy in the room remained fixated on Amelia. She was no longer just a guest. She was the event's biggest story. As the formal part of the evening concluded and people began to mingle more freely, a steady stream of admirers made their way to Sterling's table. Curators, gallery owners, fashion stylists, people Mark would have killed for a 5-minute meeting with, were now handing Amelia their business cards, their faces alight with enthusiasm. A private showing, a feature in our spring issue, would love to discuss a collaboration. It was a dizzying, intoxicating flood of validation. Amelia handled it with a grace that surprised even herself, thanking each person accepting their cards and promising to be in touch. Alistair Sterling remained by her side, a quiet, powerful presence who intervened only when someone became too pushy, deflecting them with a polite but firm word. He was her shield and her champion. Eventually, Mark made a final desperate attempt. He saw a momentary lull in the crowd around Amelia and approached the table, his face a pathetic mix of contrition and naked opportunism. Isabella was nowhere to be seen. She had apparently abandoned the sinking ship. "Amelia?" He began, his voice hoarse. "Can I have a word?" Before Amelia could respond, Sterling turned his cool gaze on him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The sheer force of his disapproval was a physical barrier. "I believe you've said quite enough to Ms. Hayes for one evening," Mr. Thompson Sterling said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are no longer welcome at this table, or at this event." He gave a nearly imperceptible nod to one of his security guards who materialized at Mark's elbow. Mark's face crumpled. The final public rejection was complete. Defeated, he allowed the guard to escort him away. His shoulders slumped, a man utterly broken by his own arrogance. Watching him go, Amelia felt a final definitive severing of their past. The power he'd held over her for so long had evaporated completely. When the crowd had finally thinned, Alistair turned to her. "This is all a bit overwhelming, I imagine," he said, his insight surprising her. "Would you care for a moment of quiet? There's a private terrace upstairs with a view of the park." Amelia nodded, grateful for the offer of escape. "I'd like that very much." He led her through a discreet door and up a winding staircase to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a welcome relief. Below them, the lights of Central Park glittered like a fallen sky. The noise of the gala was a distant, muffled roar. They stood in comfortable silence for a few moments, leaning against the stone balustrade. "I still can't quite believe any of this is real," Amelia said softly, looking out at the city. "I assure you it is," Alistair replied. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "Amelia, what I saw in your work tonight wasn't just talent. It was a unique voice, a perspective that is desperately missing in the world of high jewelry, which has become so commercial, so soulless." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am not just a technology investor. My family's roots are in luxury goods. Decades ago, my grandfather founded Sterling & Co., a brand that was once synonymous with bespoke elegance. Over the years, it has lost its way, becoming just another name in a portfolio of assets. I have recently taken back personal control of the company. I want to restore it to its former glory. I want to bring back the artistry, the soul." Amelia listened, her heart beating a little faster. She had a feeling she knew where this was going, but it seemed too fantastic to be true. I am not looking for just a designer. Amelia, he continued, his gaze intense. I am looking for a partner, a creative director, someone with a vision to rebuild the entire aesthetic of the brand. I am looking for you. The offer hung in the air between them, as breathtaking as the view. Head designer, creative director of Sterling & Co. It was the kind of opportunity she had never even allowed herself to dream of. The little hobby that Mark had so casually dismissed was now being offered a throne. Me, she whispered. But I have no formal training, no experience running a department. You have something far more important, he interjected gently. You have a pure, undiluted vision. The rest can be taught. You will have any resource you require, any budget, a full team, complete creative freedom. The only thing I ask is that you bring the same heart and soul that you put into that brooch into everything you create for Sterling & Co. Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, not of sadness or humiliation, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. This man had not only saved her from the worst moment of her life, but he was now offering her the chance to live the life she had always been told was impossible. Why, she asked the question, genuine. Why me? You could have anyone in the world. Alistair looked away for a moment out at the city lights. Because, he said, his voice softer now with a hint of something personal, something vulnerable. I have spent my life surrounded by people who calculate every angle, who value things only for their price tag. They see a company and see a stock price. They see a person and see a connection to exploit. It's tiresome. When I saw your work, I saw something true, something made for the pure love of its own beauty. It reminded me that such things still exist. I want to be a part of that. I want to build something real with a real artist. He met her eyes again. The world needs more beauty, Amelia, and you create it. So what do you say? Looking at this powerful, intelligent, and unexpectedly soulful man, Amelia knew her life had irrevocably changed. The path forward was terrifying and unknown, but for the first time, it was entirely her own. She took a deep, steadying breath, a real smile blooming on her face. Mr. Sterling, she said, I say yes. The months that followed the gala were a whirlwind of creation and transformation. Saying yes to Alistair Sterling was like stepping through a door into a different reality. On her first day, she wasn't led to a cubicle, but to a sprawling, sun-drenched design studio overlooking Fifth Avenue. It was a blank canvas of white walls, polished oak floors, and state-of-the-art equipment. It was hers. Alistair was true to his word. Amelia was given complete autonomy. She spent the first few weeks not designing but dreaming. She filled sketchbooks with drawings inspired by forgotten myths, celestial phenomena, and the secret geometry of nature. She interviewed and hired a small, passionate team of jewelers and artisans who shared her reverence for the craft. They were her hands, her collaborators, her first believers. The work was demanding, more challenging than anything she had ever done. There were budgets to manage, deadlines to meet, and the immense pressure of reviving a legendary brand. There were moments of doubt, nights when she would stare at her reflection and see the same uncertain woman from the one-bedroom apartment. But then she would walk into her studio, the scent of jeweler's wax and hot metal in the air, and she would remember who she was. She was an artist. This was where she belonged. Alistair was a constant, steadying presence. He was not a micromanager. He was a patron in the truest sense of the word. He would visit the studio once or twice a week, not to inspect but to observe. He would watch fascinated as Amelia explained the story behind a new design, or showed him a wax model of a complex piece. Their relationship was strictly professional, yet it was imbued with a deep, unspoken respect and a growing friendship. He spoke to her as an equal, valued her opinion not just on design, but on business strategy and marketing. With him she felt not just seen but heard. She learned more about him too. He was a man who carried the weight of a dynastic legacy but possessed the heart of an innovator. He spoke of his grandfather, the original founder, with a reverence that touched her. He wanted to do more than make money. He wanted to create a legacy of his own, one built on beauty and integrity. In their shared purpose, Amelia found a profound sense of belonging. While Amelia was building a new life, the remnants of her old one were collapsing. The news of Mark Thompson's public humiliation and the subsequent loss of his landmark real estate deal spread through the city's financial circles like a virus. His reputation was shattered. Partners pulled out, banks called in loans, and his company, which had been built on a foundation of aggressive deals and sheer bravado, began to crumble. Isabella Vance, whose attraction to Mark had been directly proportional to his net worth and social standing, did not stick around to witness the fallout. She left him within a month of the gala, her departure, as swift and merciless as his own dismissal of Amelia had been. Her parting words, overheard by a colleague of Chloe's, were a bitter echo of Mark's own cruelty. "I don't associate with failures." Mark was left with nothing but the rubble of his ambition. He had to sell their massive house, the one he had been so proud of, the one Amelia had never truly felt at home in. He moved into a small, sterile corporate apartment, a monument to his downfall. He tried to call Amelia once, his voice a pathetic, wheedling version of its former confident boom. "Ames, I saw the news about you and Sterling and Co." "Congratulations," he'd stammered. "Listen, I was a fool. I know that. I was under a lot of pressure that night. Maybe we could get a coffee talk about old times?" Amelia felt a brief, distant flicker of pity, but it was quickly extinguished. He wasn't sorry for how he had treated her for 12 years. He was sorry he had been caught. He was sorry he had bet on the wrong horse. "There's nothing to talk about, Mark," she had replied, her voice calm and final. "I'm very busy with my new life. I wish you well." She had hung up before he could respond and blocked his number. The past was a closed book. 6 months after the gala, the day of the launch arrived. Sterling & Co. had booked the New York Botanical Garden for the unveiling of the Nova collection by Amelia Hayes. The marketing had been brilliant, teasing the mysterious AH in her story. The event was the most anticipated of the season. Amelia stood backstage, her heart pounding. She was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue gown, and at her throat was the collection's signature piece, the Celestial, a necklace of cascading diamonds and sapphires that mimicked a star being born. Alistair appeared at her side, looking at her with genuine pride. "Nervous?" he asked. Terrified, she admitted with a shaky laugh. "You have nothing to be afraid of," he said, his voice a warm reassurance. "Go out there and show them what you've made." He gave her a small, encouraging smile, and she walked out onto the stage. The room was filled with the most important figures in fashion, art, and media. Blinding flashes went off. But as Amelia looked out at the sea of faces, she felt a profound sense of calm settle over her. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. This was her stage now. She belonged in the light. The launch of the Nova collection was more than a success. It was a phenomenon. The critics raved. Jacqueline Vance dedicated a 10-page spread in her magazine to Amelia, hailing her as the most vital voice in modern jewelry design. Orders poured in from around the world, crashing the Sterling & Co. website within the first hour. Amelia Hayes was not just a name. She was a brand, a symbol of artistic integrity and unexpected triumph. Her story became a modern-day fairy tale retold in magazines and on morning talk shows. The tale of the overlooked ex-wife who, through sheer talent, was discovered by a billionaire and given a kingdom. But Amelia knew it wasn't a fairy tale. Alistair hadn't rescued a damsel in distress. He had recognized a warrior who had already survived the battle and had simply given her the arsenal she deserved. A year after that fateful night at the gala, Amelia's life was unrecognizable. She had moved into a beautiful apartment with a studio that overlooked the Hudson River. Her days were a happy blur of sketching, collaborating with her team, and traveling with Alistair to source rare gems and meet with international clients. Their professional partnership had deepened into a powerful bond, built on mutual admiration and a shared vision. There was an unspoken electricity between them, a promise of something more that simmered just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment. One crisp autumn evening, Amelia was in a town car with Alistair heading to a dinner celebrating the one-year anniversary of the collection's launch. The car got stuck in the perpetual gridlock of Times Square. Bathed in the neon glow of 1,000 advertisements, Amelia gazed out the window, still marveling at the city's relentless energy. And then she saw it. On the largest digital billboard, the one that dominated the entire square, an advertisement for Sterling & Co. appeared. It was a simple, elegant video, a close-up of a pair of hands, her hands skillfully shaping a piece of silver. Then a shot of the finished piece, a magnificent star-shaped brooch. Finally, the camera pulled back to reveal the artist herself. It was a photo taken at the launch party. She was smiling a genuine, radiant smile of pure joy and confidence, the celestial necklace glittering at her throat. Below her image, the words shimmered in elegant silver script, Sterling & Co. The Art of Creation. Amelia Hayes, creative director. She was larger than life, a 50-foot monument to her own resilience, looking out over the city that had once made her feel so small. Alistair saw her watching it, a proud smile on his face. "It looks good on you," he said softly. Amelia could only shake her head in wonder, a happy, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. At that very same moment on the street below, a man stood hunched in a slightly shabby overcoat, clutching a lukewarm cup of coffee. He had been laid off from his mid-level consulting job 2 months ago, his reputation as a man with poor judgment having followed him like a stubborn shadow. He was on his way to a job interview he knew he wouldn't get. He looked up, his eyes drawn to the blinding light of the new billboard. He saw the jewelry, then he saw the woman. His coffee cup slipped from his numb fingers, splashing unnoticed on the grimy pavement. It was Amelia. But it wasn't the quiet, accommodating woman he had married and discarded. This was someone else. A radiant, powerful stranger who commanded the attention of the entire world. He stood there, a ghost on the sidewalk, completely invisible in the crowd. People jostled past him, annoyed at the obstruction. He didn't move. He just stared up at the woman on the billboard, the woman he had thrown away. He had called her a nobody. But as he stood there, small and forgotten, looking up at her shining image against the New York sky, he finally understood the devastating truth. In their story, she was not the nobody. He was. And that's the incredible story of Amelia Hayes. It's a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by someone else's opinion. The world may try to label you, to put you in a box, or to dismiss you, just like Mark did to Amelia. But true talent, real strength, and a belief in yourself can rewrite any narrative. Amelia went from being publicly shamed to publicly celebrated, not because a man saved her, but because she had a gift within her all along that was just waiting for its moment to shine. Karma found its way to the man who underestimated her, leaving him as the true nobody in the end. What did you think of Amelia's journey? Do you believe in this kind of poetic justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of empowerment and revenge, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for listening.